Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today, I'm going to create some Festive Cheers Collection Cards using the new Cheers collection from Spellbinders. This is such a fun drink-themed collection, and isn't that sunset in a glass die set absolutely gorgeous? There's also some Martini glasses, some Halloween accents that you can add to your creations, as well as Christmas accents. And I love that they have the festive holiday additions to it. It makes it so much easier to get some real fun looks out of it. There's also a Sentiments Better Press plate set, and then I also am using the Perfect Touch rectangles and tags. The embossing folder with the set is Lush Leaves, and it looks absolutely stunning with the sunset in a glass die cut. Before I start creating any cards, I'm going to create my sentiments. I'm just using my Better Press system with the press plates, using the black Better Press ink. I'm using Hammer Mill cardstock just because it's a little bit whiter than the Better Press cardstock, and I think it's going to match the cards that I'm going to create a little bit better. So just basic sentiments here. I'm not using any color, but you certainly could use color if you wanted to with these festive cards. Once you put your ink on your cardstock, put the clear plate on the base and then run it through your die cutting machine to get the letter press look. And then you get 12 different sentiments all at once, which is fantastic. Then I'm going to tape the coordinating die set in place and run that through my machine again and cut all those sentiments out. I love being able to create so many sentiments in one step, and they really space these well, so there's very little waste when it comes to the cardstock in between each and every one of those sentiments. I think it'd be fun to create just a ton of them, a bunch of different colors, and have them on hand ready to go anytime you're creating with this collection. For my first card, I'm going to create the sunset in the glass, and I wanted my glass to be a silver color, so I'm using the brushed silver cardstock from the Silver Treasured cardstock pack from Spellbinders. This is the pack that has 15 specialty papers in the package, 3 sheets of each, and there's 5 different finishes. So it's fantastic for doing holiday cards, or if you just like to work with specialty papers. There's a lot of selection in each package, and they come in silver, gold, and rose gold. So I'm going to use the silver package today, and I'm using the brush silver. I didn't want it to be too shiny. Once I had that die cut, and I also die cut a piece of acetate for the glass to make it shiny, I'm going to work on my background, and I'm doing it with the Lush Leaves embossing folder. I have some sage cardstock here, and I'm using Rustic Wilderness Distress ink to rub on my embossing folder. Fold it in half. I'm using the stacking in my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine for doing 3D embossing folders. And then I'm going to repeat that. Now I tape my paper in place so that it doesn't move and shift. I don't need to worry about that paper at all. I only need to worry about inking it. I do this technique fairly regularly, and I find about 3 inkings is usually the sweet spot. There's the odd time where I need to do a little bit more, or if you want less ink, you can do less. But I find, especially because I tend to use dye-based inks, and usually my embossing folder is fairly new when I do this, so the inks resist on the plastic. So usually 3 times is the sweet spot for getting that completely covered. I cut my background here down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and I'm just going to glue that onto my base so that can be drying while I'm assembling the rest of my glass. Now I like to use Barely Art glue with a fine tip bottle. This just gives me a lot of control with how much glue I'm dispensing, and I can use it for really tiny die cuts as well as for assembling my card. For the background of my card, I'm going to use one of the Perfect Touch rectangles and tags. I'm also going to glue that on the back of the card once again, just so that that can be gluing or drying while I'm assembling the rest. So I can set that to the side and start assembling my die cuts. I did my die cutting off screen. I used a lot of different cardstock scraps. These are Spellbinders cardstock. I'm using Raindrop for the background of the glass. Sunkissed was for the sun. Beeswax is the reflection on the water. Island Blue is the water. This pink here is pink sand, and the darker pink for the background of the umbrella is Dahlia. And then my little land or island pieces that are going to be on the glass, those are done out of fern cardstock. So there's a bunch of different colors, and I love the fact that with this sunset and a glass die set, you can get really creative with those colors. Now I could have just put that solid light pink piece down flat, but I thought it would look cute if it was striped. So I just took my detailed scissors and I just snipped out a couple of those sections to give it a striped look. For my sunset in a glass, I thought it would be nice if it had a little bit of an ink blended sunset piece. So I chose some Worn Lipstick Distress ink, just doing some quick ink blending behind there, and then I'm going to start assembling these pieces. So that background piece, like I said before, is Raindrop, and this darker, brighter blue is called Island Blue. I'm going to glue that to the front, and then I'm going to glue down that reflection piece. Now, I often like to put an acrylic block on my pieces while they're drying, but I'll usually wait until I've got all of my pieces here. This liquid glue gives you a little bit of wiggle room to move things around, and it also starts to grab your cardstock fairly quickly. Like, I want to say like 10-ish seconds. So it's nice to be able to have something that you have that wiggle room, but it also starts to grab fairly quickly. With that piece of acetate, I only die cut the bottom part of it because there isn't a die in this set that completely covers that glass, and I wanted this acetate to completely cover that glass. But by using that die and only cutting the bottom of it, I can just use my scissors to extend that a little bit, glue it to my glass, let that set for just a few moments, and then I can trim it down. Now, I want my umbrella to be sticking in the glass, so I figured I might as well glue this down at the same time so that that can be gluing at the same time or drying at the same time, as well as the fact that I think I put glue on the bottom rim of the glass and I didn't want that to completely seal shut before putting that umbrella in there. Now, I just used some scissors once that glue has set to trim that down, and it covers it absolutely perfectly. So once I have that trimmed down, I can glue my sunset piece in behind that glass there. And you can see how having that glue in that fine tip bottle really helps to have control and just put a really thin amount on that glass rim. I will let that dry for just a moment and set for just a moment because we are gluing it to that acetate. So I usually do it a tiny little bit longer. Then I can glue my glass down onto my card base. And then those florals, I'm just going to use them to decorate the bottom part of that glass. You could easily also use it for decorating the umbrella. The florals and the umbrella, they're from the Tropical Flare die set. It's an accessory die set to the Sunset in a Glass, and it has some really fun accessories to it. So there's like a lemon wedge, which you could turn into orange or grapefruit easily, or lime if you wanted. There is some cherries. So there's a lot of different options to really customize and personalize your card. So I'm going to glue them just to the bottom part of the card, but I think it would be even fun to glue them to the bottom part of the glass as well. I like to shape my florals just to give it a little bit of extra dimension, and then I tuck the other ones behind it so that that main floral is the focal point. The finishing touch is just adding a touch of stickles to the center of the flowers and a little bit on the umbrella. It just gives it a little bit of texture and sparkle. And then I'm going to add one of the sentiments. Now, I didn't want to cover my sunset. I didn't want to cover my florals. So I'm using some foam pop dots on either side of that sentiment, and I'm just going to put it right over top of the stem. I didn't want to glue it down flat because that stem has some dimension to it, and I didn't want to have my sentiment curve. So that foam pop dot is perfect for that, and this is the perfect place for that sentiment. For the second card, we're going to go Halloween, and I am not a huge Halloween person, so I don't do a whole lot of Halloween stuff, but I thought the witches accessory parts to this would be fun. One of the things that I wanted to do was turn that martini glass into kind of like a witch's cauldron. So I want it to be bubbling and boiling and dripping off the side. And I also wanted some translucency to that. So I'm using some vellum here with some solar paste, and I've got it in crocodile and beluga. So it's got a green tint as well as a blue tint. I'm mixing them all together, and I'm just going to set that aside to dry. Now, vellum doesn't like moisture, so you can see this vellum really does not like to have this solar paste on it. So what I end up doing is putting it onto my Altenew sticky mat to completely dry because it just wanted to roll up. And then when it was rolled up, if I put it somewhere, that wet solar paste was sticking to whatever I stuck it to. So I put it onto my sticky mat, let that sit aside to dry, and it really didn't take too long for it to dry, but it just gave it a nice flat surface. Now, what I should have done was put that vellum onto that sticky mat before putting those pastes on there, and it might have had a better chance of staying a little bit flat. It does finish off fairly crinkly, but that's okay. It doesn't affect the finished look. For my acetate piece for this particular one, I just took the piece that came out of the glass when I die cut it and laid it on my acetate and just cut a piece that was a little bit bigger. Now, originally I thought I was going to do my glass in black, and then I changed my mind because I didn't really like it and wanted to do it in silver, and I decided I didn't want to waste that black one, so I'm just going to glue them on top of each other and they'll have some extra dimension to them. And that acetate piece is glued between them, so it's going to give it a tiny bit of room for the extra bits that I'm going to add to it. While I'm waiting for the glass to dry as well as my vellum, I'm just assembling the witch's hat. I did all my die cutting off screen because there are a lot of little bits and tiny pieces, and it gets fairly monotonous to have a video full of just die cutting. So for the witch's legs, I'm going to use this for the stem of the wine glass. I did the base in black. I die cut the details in purple mist, and then I'm using peridot cardstock for those shoes as well as that top little piece. I'm not really sure what that top little piece is supposed to be, but I wanted it to match the shoes. So I have that there. There's also some buckles for both the hat as well as the shoes. I did that in the same brush silver that I did the glass. And I also find for a lot of these teeny tiny pieces, some reverse tweezers are very, very helpful for holding those pieces and putting that glue on it and just being able to precisely put it exactly where you want. Some of those pieces are so tiny that your fingers just get in the way and you would get glue all over them. So it's nice to have the reverse tweezers to be able to do that. Now, when I went to glue this onto the bottom of my Martini glass, I thought I was going to keep that bottom part of the glass there, but as soon as I put it on, it looked weird. It didn't look right. So I just bent that over and then used my scissors to trim that off. So here my vellum is completely dry, and you can see how it's really, really crinkly, but that's okay. I did die cut that off screen as well, so you'll see me assemble that and add that to the card. But before I go and do that, I wanted to take my perfect rectangle die cut and do a tiny little bit of ink blending. So this isn't completely white, it's fog cardstock, so it's got a bit of a light gray tone to it. And I'm doing some ink blending with shaded lilac, and then I'm also going to do just a touch of black around the edges. I wanted this to look a little bit hazy, misty, but I also wanted it to coordinate with the colors from the die cut, which is where that purple comes in, and then also where the black comes in. I didn't want to add any green to this because I kind of figured the green and the purple was going to basically make mud. And because that green is so vibrant on the die cut pieces, I didn't really think it was necessary for the background. I absolutely love the look of this purple and black blended together though. I think it looks fantastic. I'm using my Altenew sticky mat to hold that down while I'm doing the ink blending. Just makes it easy, and the inks wash off that sticky mat really, really easily as well. Sometimes they do stain, but it doesn't affect the use of the mat in any way. I often try to wash them off as soon as possible just to eliminate or reduce the staining. But like I said, it doesn't affect the use of the mat. It's still just as sticky. For my background mat, I chose that peridot cardstock again, and then I'm going to glue on the inner mat to it. So both of these are die cut with that Perfect Touch rectangles and tags die set. So it's a rectangle die set, but it has some little decorative detail around the edges, which is very, very simple, but it just enhances it a little bit. For my Martini glass, I have a triangle cut out of that vellum that has the solar paste on it, just putting that in the back. I wanted to also add the little bubbles, but I wanted to make sure that there was something in the bottom of the glass because I knew those bubbles weren't going to reach the bottom part of it. So by having that triangle of vellum there, there's at least something at the bottom and behind it. So if there's any open spaces, you still see that iridescent blue and green color. I'm just adding a tiny little bit of the liquid glue to that vellum, tucking it into the Martini glass. So it's going between the acetate and my vellum triangle there. So there's something there holding it in place. And you can see as I'm doing this that the vellum is curling because it doesn't like the moisture from that glue, but it does flatten out as it's dry. Once I get as many of those bubbles as I want in there, I do put an acrylic block on there just to kind of give all of those pieces some contact with each other and hold them flat while they are drying. Once they have dried enough, I can put them onto my card base. There's a little stir stick or swizzle stick there that I also wanted on or tucked into that martini glass, and I find it's a lot easier to put it in before that is glued to the front of the card, so I did that ahead of time. And now I can glue this to the front of the card. Now I chose this to put the swizzle stick on the left side of the glass, and that was because of the way the witch's hat was angling. I wanted to hang that off of that stick, so I paid attention to which way it was leaning or which way it was curved to make it look proper when I hung that off of there. That detail is important when I get to the next card because I accidentally did it the wrong way for the next card. So once I have that glass on there, I have a few more of those little bubble pieces I can just tuck in and fill in there. And then I also use that vellum to die cut the little drippy pieces. This die set has some drippy pieces on it that work perfectly on the edge of the martini glass. You could also do them in red as if it was blood or something like that. I personally am not like a blood and gore person. I'm not really a Halloween person. If it was all princesses and fairies, I'd be totally into it, but the gore and the creepiness is not my cup of tea. So I wanted this to look cute, which I do like witches and all of those things. Anyways. So I'm just putting the glue on the top of those little drippy pieces to hang on the outside of the rim. Tiny little bit of glue going down, but I am putting my acrylic block on top of it to hold everything in place while it is drying. And I absolutely love the look of it between the bubbles and between the little drippy pieces. The only thing that I think could even be better is to put a little bit of glossy accents on those drippy vellum pieces, but I didn't want to take it too far and chance ruining it because of that moisture. I didn't want it to start curling because of the glossy accents, but I think that would have looked cool too. Finish that off with one of the simple sentiments, and this one I think it says something cheers witches or something like that. For my next one, I'm going to do a martini glass again. This one's going to be more Christmas themed. So I'm going to be using the Christmas cocktails accessory set to go with it. I wanted to have kind of a little bit of like a peppermint martini type vibe to it. I don't really know actually if that's a thing, but it is in my world. So I'm adding some greenery to the stem of the glass. And I did a tiny little bit of ink blending to the bottom part of the drink part that's going to go inside the glass. But before I get too far with that glass, I wanted my berries on the greenery to be shiny. So I glued these berries onto those greenery pieces and then added some glossy accents and then set them aside to dry. Now, according to the package, these greenery pieces are supposed to have flowers on them, but I chose one of the berries dies instead because I like the color of that greenery with the bright red berries, especially once they are glossy. So I'm setting that aside to completely dry. So just keep in mind that you can change it up. Even if the front of the package has flowers on those stems, there's no reason you can't put something else on there. Now I am assembling these peppermint pieces, but when it comes to assembling my card, I realize it's just too much. I don't need them. So I don't actually use them on the card. I am going to put this little Santa belt around the martini glass. I just thought it was absolutely adorable. And for this particular one, on the little swizzle stick or the stir stick, I'm going to be hanging a Santa hat. So I thought the Santa belt worked well or complemented well with the Santa hat. And that's also why I kind of went with a peppermint theme because of the red, white, and black of Santa's suit. I thought the red and white would be perfect with the drink. So the bow is super easy to assemble together as well as the Santa hat. And once again, I'm just using that liquid glue for assembling all of it together. The Santa hat pieces, I did some white glitter cardstock so that there's a little bit of texture and sparkle to it. When it came to the candy cane stir sticks, I cut one out of red, cut one out of white. These cut at the same time. So I'm using one of them with red on top of white, one of them with white on top of red. I don't think it really matters. They give the very similar look to each other. But I was inspired by using the witch's legs for the Martini glass in the Halloween one. And I thought it would be fun to use one of these as the stem of the Martini glass. So I'll add that to it later. When I was die cutting the white glitter piece for the Santa hat, I also did some of those drippy pieces from the Halloween set to go on here. I kind of thought it would look like ice and be kind of frosty. Just a little addition to it. You don't have to do this, and in the end, I think it might be a little bit too much, but I just thought it was a fun way to use it. For that peppermint piece that I'm going to do for the stem of the glass, you do need to cut it down just a little bit, but it's easy enough to lay it on the stem of the glass and figure out the length of cutting it down. Now here's where I went wrong with my little stir stick. I just did it the same as the last card. I didn't take a look at the Santa hat to see which way it should be. The other thing is I had already glued down my Santa belt around there. So I need to cut this down just a tiny little bit in order to have that sitting in the glass. But because I didn't look at my Santa hat, it's actually supposed to be sitting the other way. So in a little bit, I'll notice this and I will fix it. I will take this off because the glue hadn't set totally yet. So I still had the room to set it off. And you can see I'm doing this right now. All of a sudden I realized that it needed to be sitting the other way. So there is a tiny little area at the bottom where it pulled up some of the ink blending that I had done. No problem. Once my straw piece or stir piece here, peppermint piece, is dried, I just take a detailed ink blending brush and I just fill that in. You can't even tell that it was the wrong way. But you can see how that Santa hat would have been awfully weird if it had been hanging the other way and that little fluffy ball at the end sticking up. It just would have looked wrong. So for the background part of this, I have another piece of white cardstock here, just doing some simple ink blending around the edges with some candied apple distress ink. I'm not doing a lot of color on here, just around the edges. It just kind of ties in all the colors together. I don't necessarily want to have a red background because if I did, I would have done red cardstock, but I do like the ink blending around the edges. So once that is done, I can set that to the side and I can start assembling my card. For my background piece, I'm using that same peridot. It's going to tie in with some of the greenery that I'm having on the glass as well. So it works really well. And I love that bright, vibrant green. The next green, or the next darkest shade of green, is fern, and it was a little bit too dull for the look I was going for. I wanted this to be just fun and festive and cheery. I didn't want it to be too dark and moody. I kind of thought this suited it a little bit better. So with my glass completely done, I can add that to that base there. Do want to make sure that that Santa hat is well within the card. So my Martini glass is a little bit off centered, but that's okay. I absolutely love the finished look of it. And it needs to be in order to accommodate that little Santa hat on this side. So I have my greenery here. This one is die cut out of fern cardstock, and I'm going to put that behind the other one with the berries. I'm going to have my greenery or my floral piece here right at the base of the bottom of the glass part of the Martini glass. The reason being is the bow part has two ribbons that hang down. So it wouldn't make sense to have that on the bottom of the glass, like the total bottom of the glass, because they would hang off the card. So I put it here instead. So once that is all glued down, I put my acrylic block on there just to hold that in place for a few moments till that glue started grabbing, and then chose one of my sentiments and put that towards the bottom of the glass. And I absolutely love all the texture and dimension you get with this, and that glitter cardstock really takes it to the next level. For my last card here, I decided to get a little bit creative. I'm using the Sunset in a Glass die cut again. I've done all my glasses die cut out of that brushed silver because I just liked it so much. I also have a piece of acetate that I'm going to put on here. And I was inspired for this one by those snow globes that you see that are made out of wine glasses that are upside down. So this card is going to be a slimline card. It's not going to be a traditional A2 card like the rest of them were. And you'll see in a minute why. For the base part of the glass, I have it die cut out of cardstock, and I just did a little bit of very simple ink blending with some worn lipstick distress ink as well as chipped sapphire distress ink. I'm going to use the little house silhouette from Simon's Snowglobe die set. I'm also going to use the little Santa and sleigh die cut. I did use some glitter cardstock with that same house silhouette, just so that the snow on there wasn't going to be black. And I just did that out of a scrap piece of cardstock, which is why it looked a little bit weird. I knew I was going to be cutting it out anyways. The pieces behind those houses are just scraps of holographic gold cardstock, but really not cardstock. It's the leftovers from when I do solid hot foiling. That one happened to be some sentiments, and I knew I wasn't going to be using them as sentiments. I can't remember the reason why for that one, but I keep those pieces and I use them to die cut. So I used that particular piece of scrap to die or to cut scraps to put behind those windows, but I'm also using them for another element to this card. Before I finish the bottom part of this card, I'm using some gel pens to add a little bit of accents to the Santa and sleigh. So I'm using a gold gel pen as well as a Stardust one. The Stardust one doesn't really have a lot of color, but it has some sparkle to it. So I like to put that on the little reindeer horns just to give them a little bit of life, a little bit of metallic to tie into the other metallic elements. Before I set this aside to dry, I'm just going to use my scissors to trim down those pieces, and I'm going to glue the glass part or the top part of my glass to that so that everything can be drying all at one time. So once that is together, I can set that aside to dry. Now, when I had this idea for this card, all I wanted was a drippy candle to go on top because it kind of made sense. But I couldn't find a candle die and couldn't think of anything that had any drips on it until the morning that I was creating this. And I was like, duh, there's drips in the Halloween thing. So I die cut that out of some glitter cardstock for the top of the drippy candle, measured it in my trimmer to know how wide that was, and then just cut a strip of white cardstock to make the candle part of it. Now I also use that little drippy piece to cut a piece of black to make that into the candle wick. And then the flame is going to be one of the leaves from the Leaf and Berries die cut. This is the one that I used with the Peridot cardstock for the last card. But the shape of the leaves, as well as the fact that there was just a little score line in the center of it, made it perfect for a candle flame. So I die cut that out of that same gold holographic scrap solid hot foiled cardstock. You can get gold holographic cardstock. So if you don't do solid hot foiling, you can get you just even use just gold cardstock, and that would work as well. I did put a little bit of glossy accents on it for some shine and dimension and set that aside to dry. And then it was time to assemble my card. Now my card size here is 8.5 by 3.5 inches. That sage piece of cardstock that I have there is cut down to 3.25 inches by 8.25 inches. And off screen, I just did some very simple ink blending with some Squeeze Lemonade and Rustic Wilderness. The Squeeze Lemonade just made a glowy part for the candle, and the Rustic Wilderness was just for some shadow at the base of that little snow globe. While I have those pieces or the candle drying and the glass drying on my base here, I'm just testing what my arrangement is going to look like. I'm just going to put this at the base of the candle. So I have the same greenery die cut as I did for the last card, but I have a few different colors. So that pine branch is done out of fern cardstock. These berries and leaves die cuts are done out of that same sage cardstock. So this is the same color as the background. I did the berries exactly the same with poppy field cardstock, and I put some glossy accents on them and set them aside to dry. I really love the look of those shiny red berries on there. And because I did the bow here out of red cardstock as well, it gives it a little bit of contrast. The one thing, I think it would be really pretty if that bow was done out of some gold cardstock. I think that would have been a really nice accent as well. Another option would be to change that background color. I wanted it to tie in with my greenery, so I did that color, but you could easily do whatever color you're looking for. So this is a fantastic collection for creating some really fun and festive cards, and I love the variety that you can get with it. And what I've done here is just a drop in the bucket compared to the options that you have in those die sets. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you spending your time with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.